Chapter 5. The Halls of Summer. Of all that long and terrible journey, least, perhaps, is recorded of the crossing of the Meneth Eithon. Yet those peaks were accounted the highest in the land, and a terror to travelers long after this day. It may well be that there was, in fact, little to tell, that in the mind of one who looked back to it, one day seemed scarcely different to the next. Day after day of trudging on up steep, wooded hillsides, following small rivers that had sought or cut easy routes down the slopes, over loose soil and jagged stones that slipped away under scrabbling feet. Thus the company wound a long and weary way between the looming mountain peaks. All the passes, all but the very highest slopes, were smothered by the forest, as it seemed to Elof, till he fell idly to wondering how the heights could sustain themselves under the onslaught of so many trees, their roots tearing at the very bones of the rock. But he found this part of the forest less oppressive, for at these heights they walked once more chiefly among the evergreen pine woods he knew, the air rich with the same tang of tars and resins as in the Northland forests, though many of the trees themselves proved strange to him, or odd variants of familiar kinds. The cooler, drier clime he found invigorating, and he all but forgot the looming presence he had been so conscious of in the lowlands. Equally heartened were the others from such lands, Rock and Ills and Guise, who was as close to joyful as he had been since the death of his friend. Here his hunting skills were at their best, and by his catch and Kermorvan's, the company lived well enough without relying too heavily on their precious store of venison. Best of all, perhaps, it was now high summer, and that worst of perils, the weather, was held firmly in check. Even the winds in the high passes were moderated by the trees. It seems, therefore, that many long days slipped by without incident, until, passing between two high peaks, they found no higher ones reared up beyond, and that the trees led them towards a downward slope. Then the company began to believe that the end of their crossing was nigh. They camped that night in a little valley between two lesser peaks, and set out the next morning, tingling from a bath in the pools of a mountain spring, eager for some glimpse of the new horizons eastward. But ere they had gone very far downhill, they found that the trees came to a sudden end, and even the ground beneath. Beyond them was nothing but blue sky heaped white with cloud castles, as if they had come to the world's end. They guessed it must be the edge of a steep slope or a cliff, the trees growing to the very brink, and they hastened forward, full of excitement, seeking what might be seen from this high place. Kermorvan's stride, long and light, carried him ahead of his companions, and when Elof reached him he stood poised on the very brink, gazing out to the far horizon. Elof prudently caught hold of a hanging pine branch as he stepped out to join him, and caught sight of Kermorvan's face. His look was strange, grimness and great wonder struggling for mastery. Elof turned quickly to see what moved the warrior thus, and in finding his footing, he looked down. The world dropped away from under him, and he was seized in the empty clutch of the abyss. He gazed down upon treetops as tall as those that waved and whispered above his head. It was unnatural to see them so tiny and remote, as if he looked somehow through the eyes of a bird soaring against the sun. Right to the foot of the cliff they grew, unbroken, as if that wall of stone had been suddenly thrust up out of solid forest, without toppling a single tree. So the forest was here also, and awaiting them. Then understanding flowed like the ice into his blood. He clutched the branch with convulsive strength. He had guessed Kermorvan's thought. If the forest came unbroken across these mountains, then where did it end? To the distant horizon he raised his eyes, across all the broad lands between, and all was dark with trees. Back to his childhood the sight took him, sitting on the hillside among the herds, gazing out over the immensity of the western ocean, and wondering what lands might lie on its far shores, if shores it had. This too was an ocean. The wind drove waves across it. The scudding clouds swept purple shadows over it as they did over the green ocean. And this, too, held no promise of a further shore. All they could see was forest unbroken, unending over this whole face of the world. The distance, that I knew, breathed Kermorvan, his face suddenly very young and uncertain. But this makes it real and terrible. From here to that horizon we must travel many times over ere we could hope to find the forest's end. And how far beyond that to what we seek? He shook his head. I begin to wonder if I shall ever find that, if it can be found. The Eastlands? Kermorvan hesitated a moment. I fear not. Oh, it may save Kerbrahine to find them, or it may not. But I see now that I sought something more. A thing for which the East was only a guise. Some shadow, perhaps, of the glories of old, when my ancestors were kings, when I would have been a king. He grimaced angrily. A shadow indeed, and folly cast it. A phantom of things that are not, that never were, perhaps. Nobility, heroism, true kingship, have they fled the world? Or were they never truly in it? Were they always lies and glosses by chroniclers upon the folly and malice of men? If I were born back to Morven of old, would I find it any better than Kerbrahine? Or Caris itself, any greater than Morven, save in power and pomp? Can the hearts and minds of men have changed so much in the passing years? I fear not. The youth faded from his features. Their lines deepened and set. Years beyond his own settled upon him like motes of graying dust. As harsh and ancient as the raw granite below them was his face now, and as unyielding. Thus he had looked in the court of the Duergar. But now it was against himself he turned that stony judgment. I hunted a dream that lies not eastward, nor any other way. And whither has my false quest led you all? And at what grave cost? Elof looked up at him. Not all dreams are false. I also seek one. To follow the sunrise I am pledged, till I find my life's fulfillment, or its end. The others also have their dreams, I do not doubt, of wealth, honor, adventure, if nothing else. They knew their peril, if not its nature, and chose to follow regardless. But you have touched your dream, and it lives. She lives. Of mine, I am no longer sure. Is that any reason to cast it aside? Give it life. Make it live. Give it your life, if need be. Even if you fail, it need not be wasted. Make some part of it true, at least, and you may inspire others. But my lord, I tell you this. In all my wanderings, I have met no man more able to bring such a dream as yours to birth than you yourself. You owe yourself the attempt. Yourself and all the others we have lost. Grimorvan stiffened. He said no word to Elof, but glanced quickly at the others ranged along the cliff, staring unbelievingly at the expanse of trees before them. When he called to them, his voice was clear and strong. A barrier indeed, but our forebears crossed it. Women and children, young and old, all alike. Shall we deem ourselves so much weaker than they? They found ways, and so shall we. For a first step, why not a safe path down? Let us search. He turned away from the brink, and as he faced Elof, he smiled his thin smile. The gray years had passed from his brow. A way there must be indeed, muttered Rock to Elof, as they and Ills made their way along the cliff top. But by all accounts, there were plenty never came through that crossing. Let's hope it's not their way we find. Indeed, said Elof. But perhaps the way mattered less than they who trod it. Those who came safe to the west had great leaders. This man Vade, for one. That is our strength also. It is his doubt, I fear, the division of his will. Ills grunted. Better a captain who knows doubt than one who doesn't, as is that creature Brihon. Only doubts do not consume him, said Elof. As within sound steel, a tiny flaw may spread, or a bright fire coal burn away from beneath and fall to ash. To that, the others made no answer. It was long leagues of uneven ground before they found their descent, and the bright clouds of morning had been ousted by dark fleets racing southward before the wind, trailing drizzle across the treetops. The cliff face had no sudden end, but turned gradually to a steep slope with many patches of perilous scree and only a few pine trees, chiefly foxtails and whitebarks bent and tormented by the prevailing wind. Finally, the slope became a broken surface of shelf and outcrop, a natural stair. Trees grew on every ledge that could bear them, providing welcome handholds. On steeper passages, the travelers found themselves all but swinging from one branch to the next, never trusting the grip of their feet on smooth stone and shifting soil. Once, Burr slipped and went slithering away across the rock, but fetched up against a stout pitch pine sapling with only a few scratches. As well you've been on shorter commons of late, laughed Tenvar, or it might never have stood the strain. It was early evening before they at last came to more level ground. They were all weary, but still in good humor. It was something to have come through unknown mountains without worse hazard, and with the promise of rain in the air, they were even glad to be back beneath the shelter of the trees. Within a stand of tall firs, they found a spot that was dry and well floored with soft needles, and none could see any reason to go further that night. They had not hunted that day, but there was still plenty of dried venison to be stewed with herbs. The travelers sprawled around the little earth oven as the shadows lengthened, resting their aching limbs and feeling secure and dry after their exertions. The faint scent of cooking, rich and savory, seemed the promise of a very banquet. "Here comes the rain," said Il sleepily, as new gusts of wind ruffled the forest around. She was always most aware of the weather, being least accustomed to it. "Hear it rattle down." "Down here we can snap our fingers at it," sighed Elof, stretching contentedly. But even as he spoke, he felt a sudden qualm, as of something forgotten that should have sprung to mind. He looked around uneasily. Rock raised himself on one elbow, peering into the gloom beyond the trees, and leaned over to Elof. "You asked me," he began, unusually hesitant, as if he feared to seem foolish. "You asked me to tell you if I felt, well, that someone was about to turn round. Well, that's the feeling I've got." He shivered. "How the storm blows." It seemed to be racing straight towards them. At every gust, the rustle and creak of boughs grew nearer, louder. And with that thought, Elof's qualms became a chill stab of awareness. "How it blows indeed!" he cried. Kermorven stared at him. Their eyes met. Then, as one, they sprang up while the others gaped. "Up! Up, all of you!" shouted Kermorven, drawing his sword and snatching up his pack. "Up and run! Run from the wind!" Even as he cried out, a great gust raced upon the stand of trees and seemed somehow to circle it, so that the boughs above stooped and nodded, and the raindrops spattered in. "Up! Out of the trees! Go!" Then came a hiss, a thud. He stumbled back against a trunk. The ground before him, a long spear quivered. The least step more, and it would have impaled him. Tenvar dived for another gap in the trees, then fell flat with a yell as spears hissed by his head. Arvis, about to dodge behind a tree trunk, stared aghast at the gray-fletched arrow that sang in the bark a hair's breadth from his fingers. Gai's bow was drawn, Elof's hammer in hand, but Kermorven's clear command froze them even as they sought their mark. "No, hold your hand. Do you not see?" Another gust shook the bending boughs. The foliage rustled softly apart. Long, low sunbeams poured in and set strange leaves glittering upon every tree. Slowly, Elof let the hammer sink. 30 or 40 could be up there. Arrows or spears. What matter? It was too many to fight, surrounded as they were. He cursed himself for failing to remember that trick of stealing up under cover of a rain squall. It was no comfort to guess that Kermorven must feel much the same. "Stand your ground," the warrior commanded them, letting fall his pack. "If they wish to slay us, they could already have done so." "Be these your watchers, then?" demanded Burr, peering up into the trees. "Shy of showing themselves, aren't they?" Scarcely had the words left his lips when a loud rush of trees made them all jump. The thud of feet on earth suddenly a ring of shadowy figures barred the gaps in the tree circle. Tall and gangling they seemed, their stance oddly bowed. But keen eyes gleamed, the colors of the trees. Kermorven lifted his head in silent recognition. These are they. We have met them before, Elof and Ills and I, and come to no harm. Be still, that they may see we mean none to them. Slowly he folded his arms and leaned back against the tree. The figures nearest him stepped warily forward, and as they moved into the light, many of the company gasped. "The children of Tapiao, indeed," said Ills softly. Two advanced, the reddening light glinting upon their hair, long, luxuriant, red-brown in hue. They were women, like as close kin to those they had encountered in Aithanek, in the west. In their way they were fair, their faces lean, wiry, but smooth and unlined, strangely expressionless. Only their eyes glittered with animal intensity. Their garb, or lack of it, was the same. No more than harness of studded leather about thigh and breast. Elof heard Rock chuckle appreciatively, and Ills warn him he might soon snigger on the other side of his face. Others followed them, men and women both, and to Elof's surprise, they were less alike. Some were taller, padding along on limbs so long they seemed spidery. Others shorter and more human in shape, though the least of them matched Kermorven and Guy's, and clad in plain brown tunics of green and brown. One girl had hair as dark as Elof's, though her limbs were long and her eyes were that wild, cat-like green. She stepped up to Tenvar, peering at him, and put up a hand to touch his face. He flinched when he saw it. The least human thing about her. The fingers twice the length of his own, the thumb short and set low. "Steady," Elof told him. "Must be your dark skin. She may never have seen it before." Guys nodded stolidly. I can believe that. Their own damned hides are as milky as Southern's." "He's right," said Ills. "I thought so before, and now I see more of them. But not their hair," said Elof, considering. "No red or blonde, little black." "Aye, indeed," said Rock curiously, running his fingers through his own flame-red crown. "It's mostly that bronze shade, like 'twas a blend of all. I've seen but one head that shade. Know it well. But on whom now?" Then he caught sight of the others' faces, and together their eyes turned to Kermorven, and the woman who stood before him. A likeness deeper than the shade of their hair leaped to Elof's startled eyes, though he could not say whether it lay in some general thing, such as the proud set of the lean faces, or some true semblance in the bones beneath. Then a shout from Borhi distracted them. One tall forest man had scooped up his pack, and was casually rummaging about it with his long fingers. "Get your thieving mitts out of there!" yelled Borhi, moving to snatch the long wrist away. He jerked his head back, choking, as two broad spears clashed at his throat. "Easy, man," said Kermorven reassuringly. "Let them look. Would you not search strangers loose in your lands? See, he steals nothing. And he reached out a foot and tipped his pack towards one of the women. She flashed him a wary glance from under her thick eyebrows, then ducked down and twitched open the straps. Quickly but carefully, she pulled out strips of dried meat, spare garments, and some lesser oddments, sniffed at a box of salves and bandages. Then she hauled out a large and heavy parcel of oiled leather that Elof remembered well. Il's, too, by the anxious glance she shot him. He could only bite his lip and shrug. Had Kermorven meant her to paw at that? He saw his friend's fists clench hard as the woman idly peeled back the leather, and metal rang within. Unwrapping the dark helm and mail, she gave Kermorven a sharp glance, but let them spill carelessly on the ground as she spied the gleam of gold within. Kermorven's frown deepened. Then, her gasp of astonishment was clear as the demescended breastplate spilled into her hand, its crest a flaming web of gold in the dying fires of day. Up to the watchful trees she brandished it, and the travelers heard a soft, sighing cadence. A breeze like the low breath of awe ran through the foliage. "Margarenak, Athael," she said softly, and Elof gaped. "Raven and sun," he breathed in astonishment. "Kermorven, she knows your crest." Kermorven nodded, looking slightly dazed. "So I see, though I cannot understand her words. How may you? Is it some arcane speech?" "Arcane? Man, it is your own." "What?" "Aye, listen. In ancient books I have seen it written thus. It is your tongue as they spoke it of old. The word's the same, only their sound differs. Listen." Elof turned to the woman and spoke as slowly and clearly as he could. "Crythena, Margran, Ak, Aiel, Ain, Inna Kermorven, Arlath, Conveda." "You I understood," barked Kermorven. "The crest is mine. I am the Lord Kermorven. But did she?" The woman looked at them both, cocked her head at Kermorven, her mouth silently forming words. Then suddenly she darted forward, peering down into his face with an air of startled recognition. Abruptly, she turned and shouted something. There was a flurry of movement, and Elof felt long hands seize him. He struggled to reach his sword, but fingers of steel wire clamped his hand crushingly to the hilt. He heard Ilse cry out, had a brief glimpse of Rock and Borhi threshing and struggling in the grip of 4 tall woodsfolk. Then he was plucked from the ground and hurled straight at the wall of foliage overhead. Even though he knew now that he was being swept along by those elongated arms, swinging from bough to bough, it was a dizzying, sickening sensation. Branch after branch hurtled crazily straight at his face, into his eyes. At such speed it must dash out his brains, and he flinched in fright. Then, at the last moment, it would be whisked aside, and the next one lash at him. The rush and sough of the wind around him rose to a shrieking gale, speeding cold droplets that stung his cheeks like hailstones. The mad rush of the air seemed to choke him, stifling breath and mind alike. Though of falling he felt no fear, knowing too well the effortless strength of the hands and feet that held him. He could hardly cling to coherent thought enough to wonder or worry about his friends, or where they were being taken, or how long the journey was. Only the failing light gave him any sense of passing time. He guessed they were moving down slope, but never for a moment could he be sure. Then, as abruptly as it began, it ended. He felt a sudden, jarring halt, swung for a moment in shadowy emptiness, then saw a green sward, as it seemed, rise up under his feet. Hard ground slapped them a crisp blow. Able to stand, he fell on all fours and clung to turf that heaved under him like a ship. Someone groaned beside him, and he saw Borhi sprawled there, staring at him with white-rimmed eyes, face bloodless, mouth working. On his other side was Rock, sprawled, gasping upon his back, and beyond him, Kermorven, clambering unsteadily to his feet. But suddenly the tall man rested on one knee, gazing upward, his thin lips parted, his stern features softened with the open wonder of a child. Behind him, Arvis staggered up, only to cry out, point, and drop once more to his knees, his round face no less rapt. Swiftly, Elof heaved himself up on one elbow and followed their gaze. Then he understood, and felt the same awe swell up in his own heart at this unlooked-for vision. It was evening still, the sun hidden now by tree and cloud, yet shedding a last pale glimmer through the storm-cooled air. They lay on a broad space of level ground, for their mad journey had indeed borne them down into the eastern foothills of the Meneth Aethan. Those slopes arose above the travelers now, crested and carpeted with treetops tall and ancient, their foliage thick and shadow dark. Into the very rain clouds they mounted, that swept racing and boiling by, up to heights hidden behind the trailing veils of rain. A fine fast drizzle beat down upon them, and from their whipping leaves a haze arose that scattered the pallid stormlight into a horde of soft gleams and sudden sparkles, glowing droplets upon every shadowed leaf and bough. Solid they seemed, those tossing trees, as the stony soil they gripped. Yet in their files there was a breach, and their summits were overborne. For from the end of the greensward a way opened between them, a wide grassy way flanked by great cedars, curving up to the middle slopes of the hill. And there, wall upon wall, roof upon roof, all across the hill's wide flank, a majestic hall arose out of the forest. Towers and turrets thrust up above the wavering treetops, arched garrets and peaked gables. Down upon them gazed windows uncounted in a multitude of walls, and between those windows ran many galleries and walks. Yet it was clear that all this was part of one great building, which spread among the trees, but did not sprawl, and seemed strangely suited to its situation. Noble and strong were those walls in the gathering twilight of storm and sunset. Graceful those angled roofs, as the treetops they crowned. And even as the last gold of day slipped from the walls, 1,000 windows sprang alive with twinkling light and warmth behind the cool tossing of the trees. "A very town it might be, in one building," marveled Rock. "A mighty citadel." Kermorven shook his head. "No," he answered absently. No citadel this, though, as imposing, it was not made to withstand assault. Nor to confine? Asked Elof quietly. No more that, answered Kermorven decisively. Ilse nodded, her round eyes peering far into the gloom. If it has defenses, that place, they are not in its walls. Yet, my heart tells me that defenses it will have. Elof glanced warily around. All the company were there, at least, and their baggage also. Thankfully, he snatched up his precious pack. He felt suddenly weak and famished, and found himself pining absurdly for the food left steaming in the little glade. But now their captors were helping them to their feet, gently enough, and urging them towards the grassy way. No gate barred it, but on either side were tall hummocks of green, like banks or thick hedges. Only as he drew closer did Elof see patches of gray-white beneath. They were walls, stone walls, heavily overgrown with creepers and a kind of ivy. One even began in a stone pedestal, such as he had seen flanking gates in Kerbrahine, bearing statues or other ornaments. But opposite it, there was only a half-formed heap of rough stone blocks, hardly visible through the weeds. The cedars grew so close to the sides of the way that high above it their branches met and entwined, lightest and airiest of vaultings. But nowhere did their roots intrude upon the smooth grass. So strong was the feeling of order that in the gloom Elof could almost believe himself walking in Duergar halls, or the calm cloisters of Kerbrahine, between pillars of stone, beneath arches of carven foliage. But ahead of him, a sudden light spilled out along their trunks, outlining a tall gate opening, and out from it, in slow procession, came files of lesser lights, torch and twinkling lanthorn. Into the way they streamed, and by their shifting light he saw more clearly those who bore them. Very tall and stately they stood, grace and dignity in their bearing, and the torchlight flickered mellow over rich patterns, embroideries in their garments, picked out rich jewels adorning the shadowed faces. Scant sound they made, save the soft sigh and rustle of gown and robe against the short grass, the murmur of fair voices lowered as at some solemn occasion. A woman's laughter bubbled up, light and clear as moonlight, and as swiftly vanished. Along the flanks of the walk they ranged themselves, as if the shabby travelers were a procession that must pass between and through the open gate. The travelers stared wide-eyed. Some might have hesitated, had not Kermorven not strode on so firmly, his keen eyes alive with wonder. Elof, dry-mouthed, fought down his own unease. What else, after all, could they do? At their backs loped the ones who brought them here, and all around them was the trackless forest. But that thought only heightened the unreality of all he saw. This noble hall and lordly company before him. It was too much like a dream. Suddenly, Kermorven halted, so sharply Elof almost barged into him. Out of the gathered ranks a tall figure had stepped, and advanced towards the company. He doffed the cap he wore, and bowed deep before the travelers. Elof studied him keenly, seeing a face long-featured but wholly human, lined and weary, yet serene. Tall and slender he stood, unusually so for a man, yet far less than the woodfolk. Hand and limb were of human measure. He gazed at them for a moment. Then he spoke, and his speech was warm and clear. Corhiam, Arlathane, Heroth, Devius, Lysaoian, Aethan, Corhiam. The language was southern, and less archaic than that the woman had spoken. Elof swallowed his astonishment and whispered urgently to Kermorven. He welcomes us as lords, and names himself. I heard, said Kermorven crisply, as chosen herald of these woodland halls. Chosen by whom, I wonder. But we must answer him in all courtesy. And speaking as clearly as he could, he returned the greeting, and named one by one each member of the company, making as much of their qualities as he could, and last of all those who stood by him. To each the herald bowed, but when Kermorven named Ilse a great lady of the Duergar, a ripple of excited comment ran through the ranks of watchers. Many among them sank to one knee or made solemn obeisance. Ilse's eyes widened, and she hastily bowed in return. Elof saw how greatly such courtesies impressed her, she who had found scant honor among ordinary men. It was to Elof next that Kermorven turned, naming him a smith of great lore and greater craft for all his youth, and a valiant fighter at need. That also seemed to impress the watchers. For myself, I have led this company out of the distant Westlands, and Karen, Lord Kermorven, is my name. And as he spoke it, the woman of the woodfolk darted forward, sank on one knee before the herald, and held out the breastplate in her long arms, shining clear in the torchlight. It seemed then that a single gasp, a single sigh, arose from the shadowy watchers, running like a rushing breeze among the torch flames. Even the herald stared as if bereft of words. Then they surged forward, torches held high, and some among the company laid hand to weapon, though they could never hope to fight such a throng. But the press parted suddenly, and a man taller than most shouldered his way through. They fell silent and drew back. Seizing a torch, he strode towards the travelers, looming up over them like a young tree, his mantle and hose flaring dark green in the yellowish light, and rich gold work gleaming in his tunic. Karen, he cried. Karen, is it truly you? Do I find you here at long, long last, where I had long since lost hope of you coming? His deep voice faltered as he looked upon their uncomprehending faces. Kermorven sat grim as granite. Karen, is aught amiss? Do you bear some grievance against me? Or are you ill, then, that you offer me no greeting? I, your own brother. Elof stared around at the few faces he could make out, seeking laughter or pity in them, as at some harmless dotard or madman. But nothing of that did he see in the long countenances. Nothing but a deep interest, a tinge of concern. Kermorven's gray eyes glinted wide in the torchlight, and his voice dripped a bitterness Elof had hardly believed the man could feel. I can give you no other answer than this. My parents are dead. My mother in bearing me, her firstborn, her last. I never had a brother. But how is this? Demanded the newcomer. Does some thrall of blindness lie upon you? Oh, this is bitter cruel, bitter as the very heart of the ice. Do I not know your voice, your face as well as my own? Look upon me. Look upon my own, and tell me I lie. He held the torch high, and the first Elof saw by its light was the gray-flecked bronze of the man's hair, the tracks of tears upon his gaunt cheek. Kermorven stared up into those long features, and slowly his stern mouth lost its set. His lips parted, seemed to tremble. Ilse gasped aloud, almost a cry. A sudden deep chill sank into Elof's stomach. Distort either face, lengthen Kermorven's or shorten the other, and they would mirror one another. It was as if each mocked the other, yet both were noble, proud, even fair in their way, inescapably akin. But Kermorven shook his head. Sir, I have never set eyes upon you in my life. No, stammered the man. How may this be? You are Karen as I remember you. But that should not be. As if no time had passed. As if he, had grown no older, while I who was younger. How? How? His voice cracked in horror and confusion, and the torch shook violently in his hand. Deep lines were scored on his face, wrung as if by agony. Kermorven, without thinking, reached out reassuringly. The sudden gesture startled them both, and they stared at each other again. It was almost an intuitive acknowledgment of their kinship. He remained, murmured the stranger. And to Elof it seemed that a tension grew among the watching throng. The string of a tuned instrument wound slowly tighter. Remained behind when our last defense was overborne, when the ice itself finally came against our walls, and all along the shore the stout stones cracked and shattered like nutshells. There was a fearful sight indeed. Did we deem something so weighty could move slowly, as till then it had done, inching its way forward day by relentless day? No, not in this, its final assault. None after that night, clear and cold, without wind or cloud. So still the waters lay, still as a mirror under the moon, on the far horizon reflecting those cruel white crags that reared over once fair fields and woodlands. Yet, even their turmoil, their storms and roaring avalanches, whole ice cliffs collapsing into the waters to become great floating mountains, even that was stilled then a while. Fair, I thought it, and an omen of peace. He shivered suddenly, violently. Then it was as if the moon breathed upon the waters, for that whole great landlocked sea clouded as would a mirror, and in the very beat of my heart it turned all to silver, and thence to white. I knew then that our doom stood at our gate. Our very ships were crushed in their harbors, our islands overwhelmed. Terrors flooded across the ice, troll and dragon, and other fell beasts and fell men and half-men behind them. That then laid siege to our very walls, and behind them whom we might yet have withstood, the crags themselves advanced. No longer did they inch along. Across that frozen sea they glided, as fast it seemed as a man might run, and a howling gale was their herald. Their banners a vast wave of rubble and stone they bore before them. Its own creatures the ice overwhelmed and cared not. It bore up against our shoreward walls, and the strong stones, cracked like shells. Shells! Then my brother bade flee all the followers that were left him, his loyal lords and counselors, his soldiers and his people, all their families who remained. And when we would not, he commanded us with all his force to fare, some eastward with tidings to my own realm, but most, myself among them, westward. For thither he had already sent his young son, in charge of our sister Aze, and the great lord Vade. His son must grow up to build a new realm in the west, far beyond the reach of the ice, and there reunite the sundered kindred. He had sent the high scepter with him. He would have need of more tangible force if he was to assert his kingship and his power. The man stared at them now with eyes that burned. We were to make our way west as best we could, and if we could come there, serve the holder of the scepter, his rightful heir. But my brother, he himself would not come, for in his city, he said, lay his destiny, to live or die with it. And he took the crown and 2 old warriors of his guard, and went from among us. What could we give him then, but our last obedience? We took what we might gather, and made a great sally from the landward gates, scattered the besiegers there, and won free. But even as we ran free across the hills, we turned and looked back, and saw the white crags grind across our walls, scrape them from sight as the edge of a hand wipes clean a slate. The tall towers, the bridges and battlements, the rows of rooftops, we saw them leap up in thunder and turmoil before the advancing walls, and topple or be crushed. Then all was ground down into silence. All that had come down to us across long centuries, that only days past had seemed to us mighty enough to withstand as many years more, strong enough to scorn the challenge of mere ice. All that we saw crumble and vanish before us in a mere shred of time. All the mountains of the earth falling could not have obliterated it more completely. The very dust that escaped the ice its gales took and scattered in mockery. Many among us slew themselves upon their own weapons at the sight, or cast themselves down from the heights. For it seemed to us that all the shielding powers had forsaken us, and that the world's ending was come. Elof, standing silent and dumbfounded, heard a soft sigh arise from the watchers, like an echo of some dark deep of pain revisited. It awakened in him memories he hated, the destruction of the little town of Assenby, where he had grown up, his guilt at having so fervently wished it. Beside him, Kermorven, left gaping as wide as any, at last found voice. My lord, who are you?" The gray-blue eyes so like his own flashed at him, and the voice rang like some dark-toned horn. I am Corentin Rudri, Prince of the House of Kermorven, High Steward of the Realm of Morven, Sea Lord of Kermorvenek. All this by the will of my brother Karen, High King of Kermorven the City and the Realm of Morven, 165th in that line since the flight from Karis. Elof, torn between anger and amazement, could not forbear. "How can any of this be?" he burst out. "Tell me that, my lord, when he who stands by me is well nigh 200th of his house, the 30th born in the western lands. And when, since the realm of Morven fell beneath the ice, nigh on 1,000 years have passed." A rumble of disquiet ran among those who watched, and the man rounded on him, his face a set mask of anger. It was alarming how like Kermorven the expression made him, but Elof met the cold gray eyes firmly, and almost at once the anger faded. "Elof, you name yourself," murmured the man. "One alone that would be in the ancient tongues. Strange, then, that you also should remind me of someone, not so closely, of whom I cannot think, but it is strong. And what you say, this is madness, madness." Again the man's face knotted and twisted, as if in the throes of some terrible struggle. He lifted shaking hands to his temples, choked as if some word trembled on the edge of speech, some word that failed him. The silence among the watching throng hardened, as if no breath should stir the air. Then a sudden trilling note, liquid and beautiful, broke it, the call of some night bird in the whispering foliage around. The tall man raised his head as if to listen, and Elof also hearkened in great wonder, for it seemed to him that in the song there was a tremor of meaning which shaped itself into words within his mind. "Within the nightshade, within the woodshade, I sing of all life, ever renewing, coming to flower. Worry is folly, doubt is deceiving, serving what lives not, slaves to its power. Look to the forest, here in its hollow, time shall bring fullness, never decay. Under its shelter, fear not the season, this and this only passes away." The rain had ceased now, and the clouds parted upon a cool summer night. As Elof listened to the bird song, he felt less oppressed by the forest, less wary of it, ever more acutely aware of its living beauty. On a nearby bush, a cobweb's pattern was picked out in raindrops, which the emerging moonlight turned to white gems. He found the craft of it almost heartbreaking. It and the silvered leaves that bore it far surpassing any counterfeit from human hand. The air itself was so fresh, it seemed to sparkle as he breathed it, rich with the myriad scents of the wood. He felt weariness and hunger fall from him like soiled mantles, and new strength flow in his veins. The tautness faded from Kermorven's stance, and he flexed his weary back and limbs. Rock gawked around him open-mouthed, as if seeing the place for the first time, and all the others of the company seemed suddenly more at ease. Hills breathed deeply and rubbed her eyes gratefully. Even after so long above ground, she much preferred moonlight to sun. The man called Corentin listened most intently, as if hearing even more than did Elof in the song. Little by little the anguish faded from his face. The last liquid trills died away among the bushes, and he turned to them with nothing in his face but grave courtesy and concern. "I pray you pardon me. I am grown discourteous, that in my sorrow at not finding him I looked for I should so disquiet another close kinsman." He smiled with calm delight. "To that name your face is title and patent beyond all dispute, and you remind me of him in more than face. What else need I know? I should have remembered that few in the forest meet by chance. I bid you welcome, in the name of the preserver who has led you hither, and these your worthy companions no less. Long is it since we had a great smith amongst us, and never before any of the mountain folk. Honor our halls, if it pleases you. Find here refreshment, rest, slumber without fear, joy in waking, for all are welcome by the preserver's will. Come." He stepped aside, smiling and eager, and gestured them to pass through the ranks of watchers and up to the gate. "Come." It was in Elof's mind to hang back, to ask more. Thresholds could be decisive things to pass, most of all where there was metal and a smith. Ills, he could see, was of like mind. The others were anxiously looking to them for guidance. But Kermorven glanced about a moment, and Elof guessed what was in his mind. If good was intended, they could cause offense. If ill, there was little enough they could do against such numbers. The warrior stepped forward, and the weary travelers after him, glancing nervously at the throng as they passed. But only grave bows greeted them, and graceful courtesies. Kermorven returned them with becoming grace, and Tenvar and Burr, as well-born northerners also. But Elof felt rustic and abashed, and dared not try. Ills, by contrast, beamed all over her broad face. "Strange day," she laughed, "when a Duergar lass gets so fine a greeting among men. I may begin to like this place." "Among men?" murmured Elof. "I wonder." As he spoke, he felt the grass grow thinner underfoot, heard his steps ring on buried stone. One step more, and he trod bare flagstones, hollowed like hands from long wear, as were the broad steps leading up to the gate. A towering arch of carven stone it was, high and fair. Yet as Elof stepped up to it, he stood startled, for it seemed to him that beyond it there was only the forest once more, a grove of trunks overshadowed by the immense and ancient oak at its end. Then he saw his error, but marveled all the more. The trees of the grove on either side were the two great gates of wood, cunningly carven and contrived to draw the eye within when opened, counterfeiting depth and distance. But the oak was real, though it rose out of the paved floor of a wide court whose walls were high. Many roofed galleries ran among them, but the oak rose still higher, its topmost branches waving free against the moon. Kermorven strode through the gate, and warily Elof followed, admiring its work as he passed. The man called Corentin noticed his interest and smiled. Closed, they still seem open and inviting, and they are without lock and bar. But we rarely close them, save against rough weathers. Here there is no worse enemy to fear, for this is Lies Arvelen, the halls of summer. He held his torch aloft, and around the high walls lamps awoke in answer. Soft, steady glows of many shades that swelled in a moment to fill the court with radiance, broken and dappled by the oak leaves into a mild summer twilight. From the galleries many voices called down fair greetings through the cool air, and spilled down great profusions of sweet-scented flowers and petals upon the travelers. Snatches of song beguiled their ears. Glimpses of fair faces caught their eyes. And above all these, the sheer majesty of the building. "This is a noble place indeed," breathed Kermorven in quiet admiration. "Larger than anything in Kerbrahine save the citadel, and more majestic. A fair sight, and a fairer welcome." "But one as strange as the other," Elof reminded him. "Still, it is work to rival even the Duergar, is it not, Ilse?" "Not quite," remarked Ilse, amused. "Do you not see the walls?" Then she could say no more, for they were surrounded in an eddy of tall folk, pressing close about them, eager to make themselves known. "My Lord Karen," said one man, shorter and broader than Corentin, yet of the same cast and color. "Welcome, welcome again. I am Lord Almayan, a cousin of your house, and this is a Lady Dirael." Tall and fair of hair, she reminded Elof uncomfortably of Lohi, though her smile was warm. Another, and younger, approached, smaller of stature, her delicate cat-like face framed by straight auburn hair, a startling contrast to the flint-faced giant on her arm, whose hair streamed fire-red as rocks about his shoulders. And by her side the Lady Terrace, and Meru Ladin, who was a distinguished guardsman of King Karen. "Meru Ladin?" repeated Kermorven, astonished, taking the outstretched hand. Elof glanced down at it in dismay. The fingers seemed longer even than Corentin's, and the arm, though still massive, matched it. Kermorven seemed about to ask the man something, but Almayan was beckoning to a wiry man with tanned complexion and dark brown hair, not unlike Elof's. "And may I present another cousin of Prince Corentin, who was once our foremost captain of the seas, Svethin." "Svethin!" cried Kermorven in astonishment. "He who drove the hordes of the ice from the Middle Isles, who met Amakak himself upon the open ocean." Svethin chuckled. "And who came close to outrowing the breeze in the other direction. But I am done with the sea now, kinsman. Welcome. Say, how is it you know of me, and I not of you?" "I read of you in the lays of Morhuan," whispered Kermorven. "You and Meru Ladin. And if this is the same Lady Dirael..." Svethin laughed outright. "Morhuan? Well, well, wait until we tell the old fool his fame has reached even those westlands of yours. Besides himself he will be. Kermorvan's eyes narrowed. My Lord Svethin, they did indeed reach us, these many centuries past. A slight frown crossed Svethin's brow, and Maru Ladin shook his head firmly. Hardly, my Lord Karen. An old fool is Morhuan indeed, but you may meet him yourself later, and judge. The Lady Terra sighed. May it drive him to play something once again. I miss hearing him of late. Not I, said the guardsman firmly. My lord, and you, Sir Smith, and your friends all, when these courtly folk will weary you with their lays and their dances and politeness, do you come hunting with the guardians and myself. For there is better sport to be had in these woods than even in the parklands of Morven, and I hear there's a huntsman among you. Elof waved to Guise, who was evidently laboring to understand this archaic form of the southern tongue, and translated the guardsman's words. Guise launched into a positive torrent of northern speech, which, to Elof's surprise, Maru Ladin evidently understood very well, and replied in a fair attempt at a Northland accent. Terrace began discussing poetry with Kermorvan, classical works Elof had never read. Ills was suddenly encircled by chattering gallants, Orhi and the Northerners by pretty girls, and even Arvis was busily discussing the commerce of the Westlands with Almayan. Elof felt absurdly left out. But then Corentin appeared once more, gathering up the travelers, a hint of kindly amusement in his resonant voice. My friends, you are weary and worn after your long journey. Who should know that better than we? So we shall set by court and celebration till you are rested, and may share in them. Food awaits you, and better rest than the forest floor has provided. Come. He ushered them briskly through the press of folk, who seemed in truth loath to let them go. Terrace, in particular, almost ran to keep up with Kermorvan, her long gown of soft blue scuffing along the flagstones. Like children bereft of their new playthings, said Ills amusedly. Rock laughed. Not much changes in a forest. Like as not, we're the first things new here in a long time. Like as not, agreed Elof, but he found no laughter in himself. Corentin led the travelers up a broad stone stair to the first level of galleries and round to the far end of the court. There, in a wider balcony whose windows looked out onto the forest, he sat them down in high, comfortable chairs round a long table raised upon a dais. His own chair had a carven canopy, and so also the one on its right hand. There he placed Kermorvan, and as the warrior sat, he glanced at Elof, placed opposite him, and raised his eyes meaningfully. In the center of both canopies was the design of the raven and the sun. To Elof's surprise, it was the long-limbed woodfolk who came to wait upon them, bringing them water to wash, then loading the tables with trenchers of meat and other foods, simple but plentiful. Kermorvan bowed formally to his host. On behalf of all, I thank you, my prince, for the hospitality of these halls. Corentin smiled and helped him to meat. I thank you, but I am not the lord of this place. A steward or castellan, perhaps, if such things mattered, but here they do not. I am only the leader of such as survived our flight from Morven. We were drawn too close in that terrible time for rank to matter so greatly. Maru Ladin's courage and resource kept many alive who would surely have perished. So what counts it that he was only a sergeant of the guard? We are of one rank and quality now. The only true lord in these halls is he who found us wandering in near death in his domains, that ancient power who gave us the very heart of his realm to dwell in. He, the preserver, the lord of forests, he who is Tapaiao. And he gestured out to the shadowy trees below. He gave you this place? Asked Ilse quietly from her seat at his left. But who built the hall? Ourselves, smiled Corentin with some pride. I doubt that Tapaiao has much appreciation of buildings. But we were fortunate in having Torve still with us. Torve the Builder, muttered Comorvin, as if in a dream. Of course. And did he plan the walls thus? Asked Ilse. Stone up to this level only? And above it? She gestured. Elof twisted round to look out across the gallery, into the court beyond. Up to its roof and the towers and rooftops he could glimpse beyond. Once mentioned, it seemed obvious. He would have seen it sooner, even without keen Duergar eyes, had it not seemed so improbable. Of all this enormous hall, almost everything above the level of this gallery, a mere second story, was made of wood. Corentin sighed. Not precisely, no. Poor Torve. He swore to make this place great, a monument to Morven that was no more, the fit center of a realm that would be a haven for all men. And he fired all of us with his vision. Man and woman, lord and lady, not one scorned to help in any way they might. His mouth twitched. It might surprise you that a Prince of Morven made a fine feller of trees and digger of ditches. Me it certainly surprised. Hard labor it was, and a long one. His eyes grew distant, vague. His voice sank almost to a murmur. The Guardians were there to help us, of course. They were fewer in number then, and the quarries of good stone were so far off. So far. Many grew weary. Many. And Torve spent the fire of his heart all the sooner in striving to rekindle theirs. Ever more seldom we saw him, until at the last. He shrugged, and slowly his eyes regained their keenness. There were still some with fire enough to continue what he had begun, myself among them, but not in stone, not when Tapaiaula affords us wood aplenty. And strange as it may seem to one of the wise stone folk, we have grown to love wood. It keeps the strength and warmth of living things about it, and it is as fitting here in the forest as stone must be in your deep delvings. What happened to this Torve, my lord? Asked Elof. For all his misgivings, he had eaten ravenously, and found no lack of anything he could wish for. After so many weeks on scant food, and then the sparse sufficiency of a hunter, it seemed marvelous beyond belief to eat a rich and varied meal, and to sit now supping at some light wine, and watching the play of the leaves below the windows. Did he simply wander away? No, smiled Corentin. Few would do that, who have once breathed the air of this realm. He went to live with the Guardians, that is all. The Guardians? Inquired Elof. Those that Ilse's folk call Tapaiao's children? A fair name, nodded the prince. and a true one, but we call them guardians, or in the Northland tongue I perceive you grew up with, Alfar. Elof sat up in surprise. Had the meaning altered? The name did not mean guardian now. He above all should know, who had once borne it in contempt, who had been named Alv, the changeling. But he thought it better then to say nothing of that. What are these guardians, my lord? What does the name signify? Are they servants, slaves, or... He waved a hand. He had been about to ask, or gaolers. Thornton looked slightly shocked. No such demeaning thing. Here no man need be what he does not wish to be, so long as he does no hurt to others. They are our friends, a simple folk, as you may see, but with many skills and virtues among that simplicity, and very dear to us. They have no greater joy than to hunt, to gather, to till the soil in their own rather crude fashion, and having Tapayao's favor, that is all they need to feed both themselves and us in abundance. That and their service they give to us with love and reverence, and to Tapayao all that and great awe, for he is their lord. They guard his domain and its bounds, keeping a watchful eye on intruders even as they hunt and gather, and so are they named. It is no poor life they lead. Many of us, like Maru Ladin, may spend days or weeks away hunting with them, and find it deeply refreshing, a rest from the court. You may also. It sounds so, smiled Kermorvan, stretched out at his ease in a chair. Have you ever gone out with them, my lord? Aye, often, said Cornton quietly, and once more it was as though a veil fell across his eyes. Often, and for long. So long that I have thought, at times... He shrugged, smiled again, and dismissed the thought with a wave of his hand. Elof looked from him to Kermorvan. He had been waiting for his friend to ask one question, one vital to them all. Better that it should have come from him, but at all event, someone had to ask. My Lord Cornington, did you not name yourself Prince of Morvennek? Is that not Morven's eastern port, and far from the ice? Cornton set his wine cup down carefully, and for the first time since his outburst at their meeting, something other than kindness and merriment played over his face. It was, Sir Smith, and so I name myself, empty honor though it be. You believe, then? Could poor little Morvennek stand when Morven fell? Messengers were sent, as I told you, but since that time, none has come westward, not one. Beyond doubt, the east is dead, gripped and ground down under the hand of the ice, far or near. The power of men unaided could not save it. My brother knew what he was about in forbidding us to return there, and so waste our lives. Do you take heed, wise smith? The gray gaze flashed in the long, lean face. For not only yours to hold is your wisdom, to risk or throw away as you will. You must not waste it in a light cause, a doomed adventure. You owe it to the men who are to come. You hold it in trust for them, as I hold my own scant store, that I may leave more than a mere life behind me. Elof rose and bowed, to relieve his question of any sting. "Then you are a prince indeed, my lord," he said, for he was deeply impressed by the sincerity of the man, much as he had been by Kermorvan's at their first meeting. But next to this man, Kermorvan might have seemed young and callow, had Elof not known better. When all had finished their meal, Cornton and some of the Alfar led them out of the gallery and across a covered bridge which joined the hall to a high, slender tower some way upslope. The moonlight was so bright now that Elof could follow his rippling shadow across the treetops below. He looked around, hoping to see further from this height, but there was only the far side of the vale, and above it the stars. He felt then that he might as well hope to reach them as the Eastlands. "Tonight you will all lie like princes," said Cornton, his good humor restored, "for this tower is my home, and yours if you will, until such time as you choose dwellings to your taste." He brought them up many winding stairs to a balcony set with chairs, and behind it a long, broad corridor, paneled in some light wood and lined with louvered doors. Behind each was a small bedchambers, the beds well strewn with furs and bright dyed blankets, so inviting that many began to yawn. A silver bowl and pitcher in an aumbry of fragrant cedar were all the other furnishings of Elof's allotted bedchamber. But these, though old and much used, were of work so rare it almost distracted his attention from Cornton's parting words. "Sleep or wake as you wish. Come and go as you will. We gather for our meals in the galleries of the court. But if you wish food here or anywhere, you have only to ask the Alfar. They may understand your northern speech better, for it seems less altered. For now, your time is your own. But some weeks hence we have one of our great festivals, to mark the height of summer. Many now absent with the guardians will be returning for that. There will be feasting, songs, dancing to beguile many a long hour. I bid you attend as our guests." Kermorvan seemed slightly dazed. "You do us every honor already, lord," he said, and bowed. "On the contrary," said Cornton, "you honor us, and in truth, you will add new zest to our revels. It is rarely now we have newcomers to welcome. It will recall to us a little of what is no more, and for you also, perhaps, it will cast some faint shadow of the glories that dwelt in Morven of old. But you shall see. A fair night to you, my brave guests, and sleep you well." With many polite good wishes, the travelers watched him stride off across the tower, heard a door open, and his footsteps mount a stair. Then they were surrounding Kermorvan and Elof, deluging them with questions that Tenvar summed up in demanding, "What is this place? Are we safe to sleep here, or should we seek to flee? Who are these folks?" Kermorvan sat leaning on the balcony rail, gazing out over the trees below. He shook his head ruefully, and a strange, slight smile played across his thin lips. "Do you ask me, of all men? When ancient heroism and tragedy, signs and symbols that all my life have inspired me, that have shaped my will to this very venture, stand living before me? When old tales I was raised on have taken my hand and spoken with me? When names 1,000 years dead are given to the young and hale? How could I dare trust such a place?" Suddenly his fist pounded the rail. "And yet I do. I must. Against all reason, my heart leaves me no choice. It will not let me gainsay them. These are the heroes and legends of old, come alive." "The legends?" asked Elof quietly. "Or the people?" Kermorven stared at him, then nodded. "A shrewd stab. All I can tell you is this, that there were once such folk as we have met or heard of tonight. They lived, all of them. Almayan the wise, Svethin the mariner, Morau Ladin, that bard Morhuin, Torve, many others, and Cornton himself not the least. Cornton Rudri they called him, the Redhead, or the Firebrand. In the realm and city of Morven they dwelt, and perished with it, so the annals of Kerbrahine record. Their deeds and works have passed into legend, into folk tale. They themselves should have been dead and dust these 1,000 years gone. Those who confront us now are not ideal figures, not legends. But the cause that legends are, that I could believe. And whoever they may be, they breathe humanity." Voorhis shivered. "We've only seen 'em by night," he muttered, and his meaning was clear. "But you've met these guardians, or children, or whatever, by day, and drawn live blood from them in fight. And in all reason, do they seem like phantoms?" "Yet they are no ordinary folk," objected Burr. "So tall, so drawn, but so fair," said Arvis reverently. "I could well believe we had shrunk in stature since their day." Kermorven shook his head. "Not by such armor as survives." Guys nodded. "They say we of the north have grown taller by the mingling of our blood with the men from overseas." "But do you not see?" began Elof, and then checked himself. Ideas turned in his mind as flotsam in a whirlpool, too fast to grasp completely. "What?" challenged Tenvar sharply. Elof shook his head. "It is nothing, perhaps. I will take counsel upon it. One matter, though, Kermorven. Are all those you recognized from the same time? Do the annals say they all lived in Morven in the same years?" The warrior glanced keenly back at him. "I know not what led you to ask that question, but it struck full in the gold. That fair lady, Diriel, if she is the same, and after her the name was deemed unfortunate, and rarely if ever given, she is well remembered as one of the great ladies of southern Morven. She was lost on the first flight westward that led to the founding of Bryhane, a good 2 centuries before Corrinton and the others were born. She should be as dead to them as they to us." A long silence fell, broken only by the rustling of the trees and the living sounds of night. Bird cries and the croak of frogs, bats shrilling, insects humming, small things scuttling and grubbing among the leaves. So recently such sounds had seemed alien, even sinister. But within this fastness of walls they spread a sense of serenity and peace. This was the voice of the forest, the soft, incessant murmur of its myriad lives busy about their own intense concerns. And it spoke to them now, steady and untroubled. Before it, fears and tensions seemed to recede. Once more the full weight of weariness settled upon Elof, but as a calmer, kinder sensation, something fitted to hour and circumstance. In the end, it was Kermorven himself who spoke. "Tenvar, you asked if we will be safe to sleep here tonight. That, at least, I can answer. We may not safely do aught else. We do not know enough." Guys snorted scornfully. "One thing we know, that they could have left us carrion on the forest floor if they wished us ill. Why offend them now?" Others voiced agreement, and Elof was surprised to hear Rock, normally most suspicious of new things, among them. "That is what I meant," answered Kermorven calmly. "We cannot judge. We must know more, and for that await the morrow. But what the mind cannot unravel, the heart may measure. And mine tells me that here we have found a haven of peace, a bastion of living might against what would ravage the world. I shall sleep as I have not for many a night." He rose and turned regretfully away from the view. "In peace." Elof looked at him in some surprise. Peaceful or not, was the mighty mystery at the heart of this place to be dismissed so lightly? But the others were of Kermorven's mind, turning toward the bedchambers, yawning and stretching as happily as in their own homes. Elof held his peace then, but sat obdurate till only he and Ills remained. "A haven," he grated. "At almost any other time I would trust Kermorven's judgment, whether it sprang from heart or mind. But not here. He is too deeply wrapped in ancient glories. He desires them true." She answered him softly. "And may they not be, after all? Slow I should be to remind any human of this save you, Elof, but we Duergar may live 3 times your short span, and more. Andvar was little short of his 300th year. Yet we are close kin. Is it then so impossible that—" He turned on her, and the concern he read in her dark eyes angered him further. Longer, yes. Not forever. And not unaged. Unchanged. Andvar was ancient, not hale as these. Can you see no difference between 300 years and 1,000? Impatience drove him from his chair. He glared at the hillside beyond, carpeted so thoroughly in trees that its contours could be seen only in their summits. In just the same way, this place reveal the mystery at its foundations, if only he could trace the shape. Kermorven says we do not know enough. I agree. But in such a mood, what will he learn? And you others are as bad. Ills put a plump hand on his shoulder, but he shook it off. Go, sleep then. Dream your dreams with the rest. I'd sooner be sure when I am awake. He repented his discourtesy even as he spoke. But as he turned with an apology on his lips, a door closed softly, and he was alone. That night there were no dreams for him. No sleep would come. The weariness burned in his limbs, and his eyes grew sore out staring the darkness. At last, as faint grayness glowed in the door louvers, he slipped from his bed and pulled on his breeches. A thought struck him, and he looped his sword belt over his shoulder before padding out barefoot onto the balcony and down the stairs, keeping to their margins lest they creak. But they did not. so solid was their making. He felt the polish of the wood under his bare feet, and wondered how it was maintained. All unbidden, there arose in his mind a vision of feet passing back and forth, the bare feet of the guardians, the light court shoes of the others, back and forth, while in the world beyond the forest, centuries paced by. He bit his lip in irritation. He had come to the galleries round the great court. Better he should stay alert. But when he peered down into its shadows, he saw nothing stirring save the foliage of the vast oak, and he made his way carefully down onto the cold flagstones beneath. He eyed the branches as he tiptoed over the stone and into their deeper shadow. He could imagine Alfar sleeping in them, but he saw nothing. Still, he hesitated. Was he not being precipitate, risking offense to seek what might be shown him in due course? Should he not wait? But he dared not abide that risk, to himself or his friends. He was bound to try. Drawing a deep breath, he pressed both palms to the ancient trunk before him. He felt nothing, save the gnarled bark beneath. He waited. There was still nothing. Not even the sensation he remembered, as if a window closed upon him. With slow care he shaped within his thoughts a clear memory, a voice immense and commanding, that seemed to be borne from vast distances upon a gusty wind, yet fell upon his mind rather than his ear. He shaped that voice a name of power and meaning. But still no answer came. At last, impatient at the graying sky, he shrugged and turned away. Just then, a sudden flurry broke out within the tree, and he snatched for his sword. Then he had to stop himself laughing aloud, for a very small green bird bounced out onto a limb level with his face, and peered at him with bright, fearless eyes. Two more fluttered down from above, and sat ruffling their feathers and preening. Another hung upside down from a lower bough, peering at him dubiously, cocking its head with such an absurd air of wisdom that he had to grin. He whistled to them softly, and in an instant he had a whole flock of them bouncing and shrilling their cries around his head. He laughed and cursed all at once. Their row might alert someone. He glared impatiently at the graying sky. He must needs wait, and try again when he could. He fought down the urge to beat on the trunk with his sword hilt. "That will not be necessary." Elof jumped in fright and whirled round. That voice came from no human throat, nor was it in the least like the immense wind-blown voice, or any other he could imagine. It was weird, at once fluting and sharp, musical yet incisive, cold and clear as spring water. "Who are you?" he gasped. "How do you know my thoughts?" "Do you not know me, one alone? Truly, men forget too soon without my aid. Yet once I used you well when you were within my power, and gave you aid. I hear it served you." "Tabayao?" whispered Elof. "It served me well, yes, and I have not forgotten. But your voice has changed." "It has not. I have no voice, or I have all voices within my domain. When last we met, I spoke in that which is nearest to me, the secret voice of trees. But there are many others, and not all can hear them or understand. But you have tasted the blood of the worm. Look up." Mutely, Elof obeyed, squinting into the high branches. He found himself meeting the beady gaze of one of the little green birds, bobbing and twittering among the leaves just above his face. Elof returned the look incredulously. One little bird could hardly produce that vast voice. Then another chirruped, and another, and in the shifting harmony and discord of their voices, he heard a higher music take shape. A clear, ringing line, expressive as a song, that grew more distinct as more and more of the little flock took up the song. Then, like a chorus in sudden unison, they were forming words. "You touch the tree as before, and your thoughts are strong. Well, would you know more?" Elof felt the shiver of apprehension once again. Rock's sleeping giant had awoken, and turned a cold eye hither. It might be better if he appeared not unduly curious. "Whatever you see fit to tell, Lord of the Forest." "There is nothing to conceal. Did you doubt the folk of Lies Arvelin? Yet as they name themselves, so in veriest truth they are. You see and speak with the very men and women of the ancient realm of Morven, who fled at its fall 1,000 winters past." Elof felt coolness pass over him, a breath of great wonder and great fear. "Then, Lord of Trees, say it is you who says this. My doubts are at, since it is you who says this, my doubts are at an end. But how came this marvel to be?" "Through my will. In bitter distress I found them astray in my realm, and I gave them shelter. They honor me as the preserver, and well they may. For all but alone among the ancient powers am I, in holding true to my primal trust. I take the part of all that lives, of life itself, to the wasting ice, to the renegade powers whose domain and weapon it is. I am sworn and bitter foe. So long I gave thought to the survival of men, and set aside this land as haven for them. Here they find a safe refuge not only from the ice, but from disorder, from disease, even from death, and from all else that the fleeting years may bring. Here they may live wholly as they wish, free to do as they will, save where it would injure or endanger another. Though few would wish it, when they are relieved of their own needs and fears, what more could men wish for than that?" Elof shook his head, barely able to take in what he was being told. Lord of the Forest, it is hard to imagine. Very well, then. I charge you. Tell all I have told you to your companions, to your lord. You came seeking a new home for yourselves and your folk. A harbor and a refuge against the menaces the powers of the ice unleash in the world. Tell them they have found it. Tell them that they need search no further, least of all into the east, long dead and decayed. Within the wide realms of the forest, greater even than your own lands, there will be room for all. I bid you stay among us, and in due time, when plans have been laid and preparations made, all your folk also, tell the Lord Kermorven. And with that, as suddenly as it had come, the voice was gone. The little birds bounced and chirped no less eagerly than before, hopping and squabbling like living emeralds among the leaves, shrill heralds of the growing dawn. But the unison note, the chime of meaning had vanished from their cries. Elof, his head still ringing with what he had heard, sat down on a bench beneath the tree and watched them a moment, enjoying their antics. He was rising to return to his bed when he heard light footsteps come into the hall, and became acutely conscious of himself, half naked, armed like some lurking outlaw. He did not want these proud lordlings to find him thus. He stepped over the bench and crouched down. Two figures crossed the hall, but close entwined. A tall man and a woman speaking in soft voices. He recognized neither, though they might well have been among the crowd he had met. Gray forms in the gray light, they stopped before a door, and there embraced and kissed, briefly, almost passionately. The woman leaned back in the man's embrace and raised her arms above her head. He touched her fingertips with his own and ran them very lightly down her arms to the shoulders of her robe. That he parted, laying bare her breasts, tracing their contours with his fingers, which cupped and caressed in a smooth, slow gesture. She turned then. The door opened, golden light spilled out across the gray stones, and they were gone. So, love still endured among immortals. Elof smiled. He had it in him to feel embarrassed at his intrusion, and yet he could not. In the embrace, in the caress, there had been something so detached, so formal, that it seemed almost ritual, symbolic, far removed from the intricacies of passion. It was beautiful, as a dance was beautiful, yet it held as little involvement. He could not caress any fair woman so dispassionately, let alone one he truly loved. To touch Kara thus? The idea ran molten silver through him, quickened his breath. It disturbed him bitterly as he clambered the weary stairs back to his room. But at least his mind was no longer churning over the marvels he had been told. And from the moment he cast himself down on his bed, he slept long and deeply, and dreamed, so far as he remembered, not at all.